Welcome. In the studio this morning, we're looking at the opportunity for student housing as an investment vehicle in Portugal and the additional offers of a golden visa residency. We are lucky to have an expert in this space from IP Investment Management, a gentleman that, despite his youthful good looks, is a veteran of 20 years' experience in real estate investment and banking. Good morning and welcome to Mr. Jason Lamb.
Thanks, Shaun. It's great to be here with you today.
Jason, purpose-built student accommodation as an investment vehicle. What is purpose-built student accommodation?
Thanks, Shaun. I think there's different types of student accommodation and student housing. Most people will be familiar with residence halls that would sit on a campus of a university. So typically first-year students, second-year students would occupy accommodation that the university would provide for them. Then you would have private rental, where you would rent a property from a landlord. You would get a few friends together, you would share an apartment, and that would be your accommodation. And then what's become very popular over the last 20 years, we've seen in the US, 10 years in the UK, and now globally is as you mentioned, purpose-built student accommodation. This is a privately owned apartment block which is let out to students. This normally has a private operator, a third-party operator that manages the rentals, manages the building, pretty much on the hospitality model, where they provide services like Wi-Fi, laundry, study rooms, games rooms. So really a comfortable and affordable accommodation.
So how does it work as an investment vehicle, and what role does IP Investment Management play in this process?
Okay, maybe a quick background on the company.
Sure.
So our sister company actually started in 2006, and essentially what they were doing is helping investors living in Asia to invest into property into Europe. Investors didn't know where to find a property, didn't know where to go, and this is what the company was doing. And over the years, investors were building up a portfolio of apartments. And as you know, with owning a direct property, it's not that easy. It's cumbersome, it's complicated. And particularly if you're living on the other side of the world, not easy to manage. So investors were saying to the company, look, can you guys look at finding a building? We'll come in with our capital. You manage it, operate it, and you decide when to sell. You're in the market. You know where the trends are and when the ups and downs. So this is what we were listening to our clients, and this is what we did. We created a product. So this is what IP Investment Management does. We buy parcels of land which are zoned and ready for development. We build a building, we manage it, we operate it, we stabilize it, and then we sell the building off to a pension fund or institution. And that's essentially what we do. It's a passive investment. Investors don't get their hands dirty. They get their quarterly investment reports, and easy investing into a growing real estate sector, which is student housing. We do other sectors, but our bread and butter over the last 10, 12 years has been student housing.
And as an investor, what sort of terms are we talking? It sounds like a 3 to 5 year sort of player. Is there a minimum investment term? Or is it a project-by-project basis?
Yeah, so we typically do single asset investment, and how it works is, 3 to 5 years. I mean, if you think about it, if we're going to be developing, you need a couple of years to develop, so call it 18 months to 2 years. Then you want to stabilize the asset. So why we need to stabilize it, we need to show the market that there's irregular income that's coming from the building. So you need another 2 years potentially.
Some track history there, of course.
Yeah, so it's showing that you've let it up to 95, 100%. And then once it's stabilized, then you sell it off. So that's 3 to 4 years, 5 years is typically the term. And I mean, if a good way to look at it is if you had to buy an apartment yourself in Manly, Sydney, and you wanted to renovate it, it takes time. You got to renovate. You got to put your effort in. You got to sweat the asset. And then over a period of time you flip it, and that's effectively what we do. But we do new builds typically.
And in any investment, my first question is always looking at the risk profile. What are the risks in this investment vehicle?
Well, there's with real estate, make no mistake, there's, as much as it's a fixed asset, it's one of the best investments to make for an investor because it's bricks and mortar. And bricks and mortar is tangible. Your money goes into the ground. The piece of land's there. The building comes up. It's got improvements. You create income and you sell off this asset. So from that perspective, real estate should always be a part of one's portfolio. So coming back to your original question, which was
the risk profile.
So risk profile. I mean, firstly, buying the land. You need to make sure, and we come across these risks all the time, and we mitigate them for our investors to get them comfortable before they come on board. So we clearly go through all the risks on each investment so that they fully understand before they pull the trigger. But first and foremost, the first risk is the land, buying the land. You need to make sure that you're buying a piece of land that you take ownership of. So this is why we also focus on developed markets where, your rule of law can be enforced, your title deed, you're going to be buying that land, it's yours. There's no issues with previous owners over a legacy of 150 years, etc. So buying the land, making sure that land then is zoned and ready for the construction.
And do you do the zoning process before or after the investors come in?
We come in, we buy the land before. So investors don't take any of that risk. We don't take that risk. It's zoned and ready. So we'll buy a piece of land.
You're ready to dig when the investment comes in.
Sorry?
You're ready to start digging when the investment comes in.
Yeah, pretty much. It's ready to go on that type of student housing or whatever the sector is. So the first risk is land risk. We mitigate that up front. Second then is development risk. Now you got to make sure you build this building. So you find a quality developer with a track record, with a contractor, put a strong professional team together, architects, engineers, etc. And you can mitigate a lot of that risk through putting in contractors, professional teams that have a track record. And then there's completion risk. So you got to make sure that you finish on time. And this is where with construction, you're not always in control of the weather, and the weather is a big factor. So typically you build in buffers and allow for time to make up for any delays. And then once you've completed this building, now you need to. So the first risk is development risk, which we mitigate by putting the professional team in place that can do the job. The second risk is now you got to rent it up. And now you got to find an operator that understands the market. So we employ third-party operators that have a track record of understanding the university sector, understand where the students are coming from, and have a marketing strategy to rent it up. And once it's rented up, we just show that continual stability. And then the next risk is, how do we sell these assets? So we've created this beautiful brand new building, and now how do we sell it and return the capital and the profits back to the investor? So we develop institutional grade properties, so high quality, but assets that are generating strong annuity income, and pension funds like that. So we exiting into a very liquid market where there's demand for these type of assets. And student housing has shown to be one of the best performing real estate sectors in comparison to retail, commercial, and industrial, because when and we saw this post GRC is that when people lose their jobs during a recession, they go back to study and reinvent themselves. And when they go back to study, they need places to stay. So student housing, even now just with the pandemic, GFC back in 2010, it bounced back the quickest. So we know that we sell into a very liquid market, a market that is in demand from pension funds and financial institutions. And you've seen a big number of transactions that have taken place recently post the pandemic, which is just showing
strong demand in that sector.
Yeah. So that mitigates the last risk, which is exit risk. So we're not selling off to private individuals. No. We're selling off into a very liquid market.
And do you get any additional funding outside of your organisation? Do you still get loans from banks, etc.?
Yeah. So we that's one of the great.
And that's another mitigation of risk in itself.
Yeah.
In a way.
Correct. So we also absolutely. I mean, I think first and foremost, banks love the student housing sector. They see, like pension funds, that it's low risk. So we use that opportunity, and we generally lend, or at least we borrow. So banks lend to us up to 65-70%, and the balance we raise through equity from high net worth individuals and family offices.
So you mentioned high nets and individual investors like myself. I've already got some investment in properties around the world. I might be invested in a REIT. I might be invested in a fund that takes real estate as part of that. What's the difference here with your vehicle? What's the differentiation?
Yeah, I think we kind of sit in between. When you buy a direct property which you're going to rent out, you always look at it from almost like a primary residence perspective. There's always an emotional connection, and that's a strong pull with real estate. So your funds that you spoke about, and I'll tell you where I'm going with this, is because when you invest into a fund, you don't know where the properties are. They'll have a mandate and they'll go and buy properties across the globe. But you don't really have a connection with that property. When you buy a property in Manly, you have a connection with it. You know it. You know the street, the coffee shops, etc. And we kind of sit in between that because we do single asset investments where an investor buys a share in a building that is located on the corner of X and Y Street in Manchester, for argument's sake. And it's they own a share. They're one of 25 investors, and there is an attachment to that. So they own a share in a building, and I think that's so there is that little bit of emotional attachment, but also you're not having to deal with a tenant on a day-to-day basis. We're the fund manager, asset manager. We manage the asset for their investors. So make it really simple and easy, but also give them that kind of personal connection. And that's the market we operate in. We're not a big institutional private equity fund. We're a small boutique fund which connects with people.
Let's move on to Iberia, which is in Portugal of all places. Now, you've got a really good track record in the United Kingdom, which has benchmarked your company for 12, 15 years. You're now going to Portugal. Why are you moving into this space?
Yeah, I think maybe to touch on the track record, UK, strong university sector, and we've done well in that market, and we still have some assets that we're managing there, and they're performing well. And it's been a successful business for the last 10, 12 years. And, the UK market is still strong. There's still a shortage of beds. If I use an example, maybe 10, 12 years ago, there were about 13, 14 students to one bed across the UK. So, everyone is fighting for beds. It's now come down to, on average, about 3 students to one bed. Still a shortage, but, you can see how it's come down. Now, we've been looking at other markets across the globe, and Portugal, our sister company, has had done some direct investments in Portugal. So it's been a market that we've been kind of close to. And our one partner that we work on in a project in Manchester, they have an office in Iberia, in Spain, and now branching out into Portugal. So through all of this and seeing the opportunities, seeing how real estate has been growing in Portugal over the last 6 years, we started looking a little bit deeper into the student housing market. And, through this could see exactly the same trends that we saw in the UK 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
22 students to one bed in Portugal, 15 students to one bed in Spain. So, these are key things to look at. Do you remember I spoke about the lettability risk?
Sure.
And getting an operator
mitigates that
to mitigate.
Because you've got big demand.
Correct. So,
and no one in the market, which the UK is very crowded in this space, always has been.
Yeah, so this is where we've got an opportunity to come in here and create a portfolio of student housing buildings and let them up, which we think we'll be able to do pretty quickly because of the lack of supply. And we know that pension funds are looking for new markets, looking for more yield in their investments, and Portugal offers us. So this is the opportunity. Strong real estate fundamentals from a student housing perspective, and then there's the silver lining, which we can touch on.
Yeah, let's get to it. This is the good bit, the golden visa. How does this work?
Yeah. So the golden visa Portugal been very clever in putting this program in place in 2015 to attract foreign investment, and it's been hugely successful with investors coming in, stimulating the market, putting foreign investment into real estate. And ultimately what they've done is then given the investors the opportunity to, through investment, to gain access to obtaining a European passport. So how the Golden Visa works, and which makes Portugal's citizenship program, I think, personally, one level above some of the other programs, because there's many programs where one can obtain it through donations or real estate or other investment vehicles. But what it does is that you invest into real estate, you get then issued you put in an application with the SEF in Portugal. You get given a Golden Visa card, which is basically a Schengen visa that allows you to travel around Europe. You can live, work, and study in Portugal. And you need to spend only 7 days on average per year for 5 years to naturalize. So the word naturalize means, like, you'll compare it to if you go to Australia or UK or US, you need to spend 183 days plus in that jurisdiction for 5 years, and then you've naturalized, and now you can apply for citizenship. So Portugal's benefit is that you only have to spend 7 days on average per annum for 5 years. So it's perfect for the expat or the foreigner that's living abroad. They can't spend time 183 days in a country to get their passport. So this is where Portugal is a differentiator. Yeah, it's quite unique. And the programs continue, and there's and what we've done is now we've clipped this opportunity into the fund that we've created out of Portugal.
A friend of mine just moved to Portugal, and he's flooding Facebook with these amazing photos of cheap wine and endless beaches, and he's living in a big, huge, beautiful new house. What are the advantages of living in Portugal? That's apart from the natural beauty. Why are people moving there?
I think, well, firstly, because just the quality of life. I think, that's the big attraction. Cost of living, the weather. It's almost 24/7. It's not crazy cold. It gets a bit hot in summer, but that lifestyle is a huge attraction. And then you see now the infrastructure is improving. You're seeing that they're becoming a tech hub. A lot of corporates are moving into Lisbon, setting up office because it's cheaper than having offices across other parts of Europe. So that's creating employment. So people come for a few years to work, and then they end up staying. And the same is on the student side. So on the higher education side, it's typically there's 360,000 students in Portugal, and about 16% of those are international students coming from Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, Macau. There's 22 speaking Portuguese countries, and students are coming from those jurisdictions to get an international degree. And now Portugal, over the past few years, has been adding more and more, or Portuguese universities adding more and more English courses to their curriculum. So now you've seen more international students that are coming in, from India, from China, from within Europe, Spain, Italy, Netherlands, Germany. They're coming to study and do maybe not their undergrads, but coming to do their postgrads or their masters because of the quality of life and to be able to have that balance. I mean, I was having a chat with Portuguese lawyer last week in Portugal, and he asked, scratches his head, why are students coming to Portugal? And the quality of life is what comes up. Study in the morning, surf in the afternoon, and drink cheap wine in the evening, and repeat. So we take it. Obviously education is important, but there's also, and we've seen particularly with the pandemic and what's happened, I think even more so, this whole lifestyle and this balance is important. And I think, Portugal offers that.
You mentioned the pandemic there's a few things to it. One thing it has taught us is that we can work from anywhere. So moving your business online to Portugal is not that huge a step these days. But how's that going to affect the student accommodation market? Obviously, you're not going to get the international students coming in as well. Are you seeing any sort of down trends in the accommodation rates and the demand?
So I think maybe starting off with online education, I think what the pandemic has done is obviously got the universities to really, it's shaking them up to put online courses that are available and easily usable for students. Before, everything was in on campus and lectures. So universities have had to readapt, and I think for what that's great for actually higher education as a whole, because now higher education is becoming a lot easily accessible for those students that weren't able to go overseas and travel and get an international degree because of the cost. That's great. There's like almost a new segment of students that's coming through, but it's not impacting what's happening on campus. Students are still traveling to study. They want to go and have that university experience. They want to go and meet their friends and network and create new networks in foreign countries. Drink cheap wine. They want to go and have a student life. And that's not changing. And it hasn't changed.
Probably got stronger, if anything.
Well, this year around. So we saw last year during the pandemic, there were still some students that traveled and they decided not to travel back home, and they stayed in their dormitories or in their private student accommodation. And they did their online learning in their rooms, but they still had a few buddies around. They still had some sort of university lifestyle. And that showed in our portfolio. We were sitting on 75% on average let across our buildings. Fast forward to this academic year, 2021-22, we're sitting at almost 100% across our portfolio because just students are flooding back. And I think a lot of students also would have deferred their studies last year, because they decided, well, let's just take a year off. We don't know what's happening. We're not going to travel. And now they're seeing that things are opening up. So, it's come back gangbusters, and students are traveling, and there's not enough accommodation. It's going to be, they're bursting at the seams, these student housing developments. And even private, you can't find a private apartment in London or across the cities of UK. So
accommodation there has gone through the roof. The rental market is absolutely saturated.
Yeah, so strong
demand.
Yeah, strong demand, strong sector. It's a good
and
place
steady.
to be. Yeah, exactly. So
going back to the golden visa for a second, I think I read somewhere that there are some changes to this coming in January 2022. Can you explain what's going to happen there?
Yeah, so from 1 January 2022, there's a few changes. Firstly, on the direct property side. So currently, investors can buy a property all over Portugal and qualify for the golden visa. What the Portuguese government have done is they've now changed that, and they said you can't invest in Lisbon, Porto, the South Coast, or the West Coast. You have to invest into the inland cities. So that's for an investor, that's quite tricky, because now, those little smaller cities don't have necessarily the, economic growth and able to find tenants. So it's a little bit of a risky investment. So there's been a lot of interest now in the funds, because the funds are not restricted to jurisdictions. They can invest anywhere. Real estate funds can invest in any location. So we're not impacted by that. But the change that's happening on the fund side is that the minimum investment is changing from 350,000 euros to 500,000 from 1 January. So that is a slight change, and we're seeing lots of interest right now, because those that don't have extra 150,000 to deploy,
it's a fair chunk of change.
Yeah, so those that are on the edge are putting the applications in pretty quickly now, and the time's running out. Because there's also additional legal fees and government fees to get into it. So it's not just let's just say 350. It's you got another 75,000 euros on top of that for the whole golden visa for 5 years. So which is paid up over 5 years, but there's additional legal fees, etc. But so there's a big rush right now because of the 350 to 500 change.
So your investment vehicle at the end of the day is really tied to the higher education sector. How are the trends in that sector? I think post-COVID, people are really valuing education. People are moving jobs a lot quicker. There's a thirst out there for knowledge, and this uptrend in the middle classes that have a real thirst for education. So how is the higher education sector faring post-COVID?
We look at movement of feet in number of applications, and we've seen now in the UK they've had record number of applications for studies. So, and that's a developed market. But I think your point on emerging markets and the growing middle class, we know that people, to get good jobs, you need to have a degree behind you. You need to be educated. So as long as the globe is growing and there's more and more 18-year-olds coming through, and there's emerging markets, we're going to see higher education always in demand. And I think this is a strong mitigating factor to student housing and purpose-built student housing. Is that there's always going to be a need for beds because student numbers are continuing to grow. So, your points are 100% correct. And governments are putting more and more money into universities and supporting universities. And in Portugal, your education is a big thing. I mean, just to give a little bit of history on Portugal, in the past, in the 60s and 70s, it was a very socialistic government. And not many of the population were actually literate. And the democratic government came in, and they changed that all around. And they've been really focused on making sure that their people are educated and focusing on education right from schools through to university. And this is coming through. English is widely spoken across Portugal because of the government's passion and thirst to educate its people based on its history. So, I think PBSA will be around because higher education is always going to be in demand.
Look, in my humble opinion, it ticks a lot of boxes. It's got security. It's in a growth sector. It looks to have fairly good returns. I see that you have an office here in Singapore and in Hong Kong. If people do want to invest, what are the next steps?
Well, I think the best is to have a conversation, have a chat, get in touch with myself. I think my details, jason.lamb at ipim.com, so ip-im.com, and happy to have a conversation. I can go through some of the opportunities that we have. We've got stuff in the UK, in the US, and now in Portugal. So always good to have a conversation. So happy to engage.
Jason, it's been an absolute enlightenment and a pleasure to have you in the studio this morning, talking all things student housing accommodation from IP Investment Management. A big thanks going out to Mr. Jason Lamb.
Thanks, Shaun. It's been a pleasure chatting to you.
Cheers, mate.